Hi, everyone. Good morning to those here in Israel and good evening to those in Australia. Welcome to the Chambers webinar with guest speaker Ehud Ya'ari, who will give us an update on the war between Israel and Hamas and the regional implications. Before we continue, I want to personally thank you, each and every one of you, for joining, and I want to make special mention of all the Chamber sponsors and members who continue to show support, especially during this most challenging period. I also want to recognize my IACC colleagues, Chairman Leon Kempler, AICC New South Wales President Gillian Siegel, and as CEO Michelle Bloom. The AICC really looks forward to working together with you all on delegations and various initiatives in 2024 and beyond. For those that have been on Chamber visits to Israel before, you will recall that we always provide at least one geopolitical briefing. We are very fortunate today to have Ehud Ya'ari with us. For many years now, Ehud is recognized as our most experienced and knowledgeable analyst, and as mentioned in the invitation, we will have ample time for Q&A. Feel free to start sending through your questions. As you are aware, the objective of the Chamber is the promotion of bilateral trade and relations. I'm happy to let you all know that the Central Bank of Israel recently estimated that the GDP growth this year will be 2.3%, and in 2024, 2.4%. Our current debt to GDP ratio is 60.9%, compared to the OECD average of 129%. And sticking with the positive news, in the past week or so, we have been approached to organize at least 6 delegations for the first half of 2024. This is something we at the AICC are most excited about, so please reach out to your local AICC office for further details. We encourage you to come and not only see the magic of Startup Nation, but also the resilient spirit. We here in Israel have been reliving the Black Shabbat, 7th of October, every single day, constantly hearing more horror stories of what happened, mixed in with unbelievable stories of heroism, which would put Hollywood to shame. A lot of people around the world don't realize that not only were Israeli Jews victims of the despicable Hamas attack, but also 20 Israeli Arab Muslims were murdered by Hamas. And when it comes to hostages, again, Hamas didn't discriminate. They brutally kidnapped 54 people from Thailand, 13 Israeli Arab Muslims, 5 Nepalese, a Chinese national, a Sri Lankan, 2 from Tanzania, and 2 from the Philippines. October 7 is the worst day in Jewish history since the Holocaust. But at the same time of this darkness, an incredible energy has emerged, where the public have come together in solidarity in numerous initiatives. Our first speaker for today is a fine example of that volunteering spirit. It is my pleasure to call upon Ambassador Mark Sofer, who is one of Israel's most distinguished and respected diplomats, who served the country for a few decades, including being our ambassador to Australia. And he's now spending hours on end supporting the Bring Them Home Now campaign. Mark, thanks for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul, and a very good evening. It's wonderful for everybody in Australia, and good morning to everybody here in Israel. It's really wonderful to reconnect with many friends and acquaintances at this event, even if it's virtual. Now, I won't take up much of your time, since you haven't come here to listen to me, but to the truly excellent and first-class Ehud Ya'ari. But Paul asked me to say a few words about something I have been very deeply involved in since the first days of the war, namely the diplomatic division of the Hostage and Missing Families Forum. The forum was set up, as Paul mentioned, part of a civil society. It's a civil society organization set up the day after, on the 8th of October, when the government, frankly, failed to rise to the occasion and step up to the plate, and in a number of ways it is yet to do so. And from day one, over 1,500 volunteers joined the organization. And when I say volunteers, I actually mean the most senior professionals in all their fields. It deals with every single need of the families in every way imaginable, except for the actual negotiations themselves: medical, psychological, legal, public relations, social media, you name it. We are in contact, constant contact, daily contact, minute by minute contact with the families, offering tangible help 24/7 for every issue that exists. Now, the diplomatic department, which I am part of, we're about 15 former senior ambassadors, deals with the hundreds of delegations and leaders that come to Israel since the 7th of October. Foreign ambassadors, the Red Cross and the UN, dual citizenship, attaining dual citizenship for those who we can for among the hostages, and sending delegations abroad. That's just part of what we do. As I say, everything that is the connection between the hostage families and the international community. Now, the return of the over 100 hostages during the hiatus opened our eyes to the unspeakable horrors that they were subjected to by the savage barbarism of the Hamas. I won't go here into more detail, of course, but you can trust me when I tell you that the stories are heart-wrenching and beyond belief. The most moderate of these are sleep deprivation, semi-starvation. A number of them have lost over half their body weight in about 45 to 50 days, and now we're in 75 days. Filthy conditions, denial of basic medication, many are wounded, and others suffer from pre-existing medical conditions. Suffice it to say that there are still 10 young women held in Hamas captivity, and here I certainly won't elaborate at all. Almost 130 remain in Gaza, elderly, some of them very elderly, including people over 80 years old. And every day matters and is an issue of life and death. One of our biggest fears is the issue will disappear from the order of the day and will be just another part of what's going on in this region. This is certainly true now as we enter into the slow season of Christmas and New Year. So you can, all of you, be of great assistance here in helping this humanitarian tragedy to remain at the top of the international and national agenda, both in Australia and outside. You have contact with the highest echelons of state and federal politicians, the media, the social media, the business community. Much, much more needs to be done. Red Cross access, media publicity, political statements on the tragedy to keep the issue alive and at the forefront. The suffering of the hostages is indescribable, and their release is urgent beyond comprehension. They need you, and they need you badly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for the amazing work you're doing in the headquarters. We've seen you there a few times. It's very special. Anyone who does visit Israel, I invite you to pay Mark a visit and show your support, which you can do here and also around the world. So thank you so much. October 7 not only revealed the poison that motivates Hamas and its supporters, but also how hypocritical, respected, well-funded international organizations that are not well-intentioned, who act with a disappointing double standard. I'm referring to the various women-related advocacy groups that don't have the decency to denounce one of the world's largest gender-based acts of violence, including gang rapes and awful sex attacks, best not mentioned on this webinar, which Mark actually alluded to. And then there is Miss Egger, president of the Red Cross, who makes next to no effort in visiting the hostages held in Gaza. She and the Red Cross are an absolute disgrace. And the best they can do is act as glorified Uber drivers for released hostages, and no offense intended to all those Uber drivers on the webinar. And last but not least is our good friend Antonio Guterres. He's right. October 7 did not happen in a vacuum. Every time Israel gets closer to peace or normalization with our neighbors, Hamas carries out despicable acts of violence to derail the process, something they've consistently done since the early 90s. But one of the things that has kept Israelis sane is that we don't need to rely on Al Jazeera and the Hollywood scenes they consistently portray. In order to be updated on what's going on, we are blessed to have access to top people like Ehud Ya'ari, who are able to analyze the situation with a laser-like focus, We get to hear him every day and every night on TV. Ehud's a real authority, has written numerous books, and is respected locally and internationally. Ehud is a close friend and a frequent visitor to Australia who briefs and meets world leaders when they visit here. It is my pleasure to call upon Ehud to speak. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. It's morning for me, of course. I will offer you a frank, straightforward reading of the situation as I see it now. We are engaged now in no less, sorry, in no less than 5 fronts. And another one is beginning to develop. A 7th front, which I refer to, is still in a sleeping mode. Now, the first front, of course, is in the Gaza Strip. We have 4 divisions operating now in Gaza. 16 of the 24 brigades of the Hamas have already been dealt with, different degrees. It doesn't mean that there are no Hamas fighters still around who are capable of coming out of a shaft from this huge system of tunnels, 500 kilometers long, and fire an RPG, anti-tank, etc. But 16 of the battalions are no longer functioning military frameworks. Just to explain, Hamas has built its force as 5 territorial brigades, each with its regional battalions, and a battalion usually represents a neighborhood, because the whole military system of Hamas is to fight from within densely populated areas with command posts, storage, bunkers, whatever you can think of, inside hospitals, inside schools, places like this. Every single hospital of the 24 that were operating in the Gaza Strip is a Hamas command post, is where they hide rocket launchers, etc. And to some of them, they have brought some of the hostages early on. So the operation now is basically coming to a close in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, Gaza City. That's the biggest brigade of Fatah with 7 battalions, and the North Gaza brigade with 5 battalions. We are coming to an end there, and we will switch to mopping operations, cleaning hideouts, locating storages of arms, getting whoever is left there from the Hamas and Islamic Jihad forces, etc. We may get to a point where the IDF and the Israeli government will declare that the northern part of Gaza is now safe for civilian population to return. The main battle now is in the city, the town of Khan Yunis, in the central part of the Gaza Strip, where we have reasons to believe Mr. Yahya Sinwar, the supreme leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, together with his beloved brother Muhammad and the chief of staff of Hamas, Marwan Issa, are hiding deep underground, 50 meters deep, maybe even more. There are 4 battalions there. We have a division, number 98, which is a commando division, special forces, less tanks, more infantry raiding into the city. And it will take not too long before they take control over the whole of Khan Yunis. And then again, you have to start the mopping operations, cleaning the area, and of course, getting to Yahya Sinwar and his comrades. We will also need to take care through some understanding with Egypt of the border between the Gaza Strip in Egypt, called in our jargon the Philadelphia line, where Hamas still operates some tunnels through which they have imported quite a lot of advanced weapons from Iran. It has proven that although the Egyptian army at the time flooded most of the tunnels with seawater, some tunnels remain functioning because, unfortunately, there are some Egyptian officers who can be convinced, bribed into cooperating with them. My assessment of the situation is that after Gaza and North Gaza, once Khan Yunis the battle there is decided, the two remaining brigades, one north of Khan Yunis, what we call the central refugee camps, and the one south of Khan Yunis, the Rafah brigade, will not really offer a fight, and many of them will try to disguise themselves as displaced people, throw their arms, turn themselves in, which is happening a lot during the past 3 weeks. But I don't see a real fierce battle after Khan Yunis. Let's hope that the army does it as quick as possible with minimal casualties, both to our soldiers and, of course, the civilian population. In Khan Yunis now, my estimate, we have about 350,000 civilians out of total displaced population during this war of 1.9 million, most of them in the open areas of the Mawasi, where the Israeli settlements of Gush Katif used to be before we pulled out in 2005, and the rest in Rafah. So this is the general picture of Gaza. A word about what my friend Ambassador Sofer was talking about before. It's quite obvious, not guesswork, that quite a few of the hostages are no longer alive. Mr. Sinwar himself it turns out, believes that he has several dozens, but they are telling to the Qatari and the Egyptian mediators that they have difficulties rounding them up for release if there is another deal for repose and exchange of hostages, prisoners. So I'm afraid there would be some truly bad news on this in the pipeline. The second front, which is not really addressed in the media, is the West Bank. In the West Bank, Israel, the IDF Central Command, with whatever forces they have allocated to them, not the top units, have mounted a very successful mini defensive shield operation. I remind you of the operation the IDF waged under Prime Minister Sharon following the suicide bombings and the terrorist attacks of the Second Intifada, where Israel basically recaptured the West Bank, all the cities, etc. This is a mini defensive shield that has managed to dismantle most of Hamas and Islamic Jihad networks, penetrate the refugee camps, especially in the north, Jenin, Tulkarem, Nablus, which became strongholds of terrorists, arresting several thousands, getting to the weapons they have been storing, dismantling explosive charges that they were planting on roads leading to the camps, etc. And that has successfully prevented a wave of terrorist attack which Hamas called for from the West Bank. I hope they manage to continue like this. You know, in the beginning of the war, there was a heated debate, quietly, behind closed doors, whether Israel has to opt to stabilize the West Bank or design the lay of the land in the West Bank for the duration of the war. Luckily, it was decided not to stabilize, but to take proactive measures in order to reduce the capabilities of Hamas and other factions to mount terrorist attacks. I said there is one sort of half front developing, and that has to do with Jordan. 2 days ago, and it's been going on for quite a long time, the Jordanian army fought for a whole day gangs of smugglers coming from Syria. These smugglers started, sponsored by the Assad regime and the Fourth Division, commanded by his brother Maher. They started with smuggling huge amounts of drugs, mainly Captagon, through Jordan to the Gulf, etc. But in recent weeks, these networks are employed by the top units of Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in order to try and sneak significant amounts of rockets, rocket launchers, ammunition, arms, you name it, into Jordan in order to get at least part of these shipments into the West Bank. And the IDF is capturing every night some of the arms smuggled, but certainly not all. It's a long border, and we are thinly spread. It reached the point that the Jordanian army has employed its air force to attack within Syria. It was quite a battle, and the Jordanians are now contemplating, mainly in consultation with the Americans who have a base in Jordan, but also with us, on whether they have to establish a de facto security zone inside Syria. So this is something to watch, which doesn't get the media attention, except in Jordan. The third front is Lebanon. We basically reached, I spent the whole day yesterday there. We basically reached a situation in which the population was evacuated from a narrow strip along the border on the Israeli side, and at the same time, over 100,000 Lebanese villagers moved north because of the constant exchange of fire going under. It's restricted so far to these narrow strip along the border, 5, 6, sometimes a bit more kilometers deep on each side. The Hezbollah is using mainly anti-tank weapons, suicide drones, Iranian manufactured, and lately they have begun to lob into Israel civilian settlements, not just army positions, rockets, short-range rockets that carry an explosive charge of 0.5 ton. No joke. In my family's home village, Betula, which is the northernmost place in Israel, surrounded 3 sides by Hezbollah, the Lebanese border, 20% of the houses were damaged, some of them destroyed. On my family's orchards, you see tanks, Israeli tanks positioned, and it was declared a closed military zone. And that village, Betula, please believe me, is the most gorgeous place in the whole country. The Israeli response to the attacks by Nasrallah have been quite successful, but not to the point of deterring him from carrying on with firing into Israel. The Hezbollah forces, I can go into the details, but the Hezbollah forces have withdrawn now for 10 kilometers deeper into Lebanon because of the Israeli pressure. A lot of Hezbollah depots, positions, underground tunnels and bunkers very close to the fence, very close to the borderlines, were destroyed over the past 75 days. The elite unit of Hezbollah, the Radwan force, which over past years was allowed by Israel to basically position itself on the border, a meter from the border, has been redeployed back away from the border. And I don't see at present any appetite on the part of Mr. Nasrallah and his Iranian sponsors to expand the hostilities. I have to explain here, with your permission, why does Nasrallah feel compelled to participate in the Gaza war. The reason is there were deliberations for months before October 7th between the Hamas, the top officers of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, led by the commander of Quds Force, General Ismail Qani, and the top Hezbollah people, on the possibility of an attack by Hamas. Hamas did not convey to them that deliberations were held in Beirut, Damascus, Tehran, over months. Hamas did not convey to these interlocutors neither the exact plan of operation nor the 0 hour, which has changed several times. But Hamas felt that they have secured a sort of vague commitment by Nasrallah and the Iranians that Hamas will not be left alone to face the IDF. In my dictionary, basically the Iranians and Hezbollah have manipulated Hamas into believing that they are coming to the rescue. And here is the gallery, the cavalry rushing in. There is a lot of criticism from within Hamas concerning this. So Nasrallah and the Iranians feel they have to play, as they define it, as a supportive front, forcing the IDF to maintain some of its forces, considerable ones, along the Lebanese border, forcing Israel to allocate a good part of its air force to the Lebanese front, etc. Together with Hezbollah, which is a Shiite organization, we see also attacks, less effective, by Sunni Muslim Lebanese organizations and by Hamas branch in Lebanon, all recruiting their fighters, or if you want, their cannon fodder, from the refugee camps, both in Syria and in Lebanon. Syria. My concern, personally, at the outset was that the Hezbollah will choose to attack through Syria and send the Radwan force. It's about 5,000 strong. These are their commando units with 16 battalions, small battalions, through Syria. But it turns out that Mr. Putin has quietly made it clear to the Iranians that he wants Syria and his protege, Mr. Assad, out of it. He doesn't want the Syrian army to be attacked by the Israeli Air Force. He feels that the Syrian regime is in a fragile situation, not really in control. The army is in a very bad shape, believe me. So Putin said no. And they had to listen so far. So what we see from Syria is, 3 squads of Palestinians, not under direct Hezbollah command, from time to time trying to send rockets into the Golan, usually missing. Maybe 50% of these rockets fall inside Syria's territory. By the way, which is true also of Hamas rockets. Maybe 40% landing or used to land in Gaza, and Hezbollah's rockets and drones. Many fall inside Lebanese territory. Having mentioned Syria, we have to keep in mind the very big Shiite militias that Iran raised in Iraq. They have been engaged in the last period with municipal elections and issues like that, but they are well equipped. They number maybe more than 100,000 rifle carriers. They have rockets. They are financed by the federal government in Baghdad, which helps the Iranians save some money for them. And they are capable of sending rockets, or trying to send rockets into Israel from western Iraq, from the desert, Anbar province, just like Saddam Hussein did during the Gulf War. They are not doing that at this point. The last front I'm coming to is the Yemen. The Houthis, who are not proxies of Iran, I would rather define them as junior partners with their own agenda and history and legacy and ideology. They are Zaydis, which is a brand of Shiism, are effectively blockading the Bab el-Mandeb, the Gate of Tears Straits, leading from the Gulf of Aden into the Red Sea, all the way going up to the Suez Canal, and some of it to the ports of Eilat and Aqaba, ours and the Jordanians' port. We are not sure to what extent they have secured some commitments from Iran before embarking on such a move. And this is a major move. 12%, 1/8 of world trade goes through the Red Sea. 9 million barrels a day of oil. Each of you can calculate what would be the economic impact globally of ships having to go through around the Cape, etc. What it does to insurance costs, shipping prices, etc. Egypt is affected more than anybody else by this blockade, because Egypt is dependent to a great extent on the income from the Suez Canal and from the oil pipeline called Sumed, which carries oil through Egypt from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. The Americans have announced yesterday the formation of a task force, in which Australia, of course, refused to participate. No wonder. Although even Canada is in, the UK, Germany, France, you have Indian ships, one Japanese ship. Australia, very reluctant. Then they probably will keep calling us to show restraint and keep living next door to this barbaric organization called Hamas. The Americans have established, and we have already something which is called Task Force or Combined Force 153, with nominally 38 countries involved, including Arab countries. What Lloyd Austin, the Defense Secretary of the United States, announced yesterday in Manama, Bahrain, headquarters of the Fifth Fleet, was of beefing it up with other naval units, with about 13 countries already involved. What is interesting is that, of course, they didn't ask Israel to join, hoping that although we have naval units in the Red Sea and capability of the Air Force to go all the way to Yemen, which is about, let's say, a little less than 2,000 kilometers. But what has happened, which at this point is a failure, is that none of the Arab states, including Egypt, has joined except small Bahrain. The other question now is whether this force, now commanded by the Fifth Fleet, the Americans, will opt for active defense that is mainly concentrate on intercepting missiles, drones, cruise missiles that the Houthis are sending against ships and in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, or whether at one point they will switch to a more offensive approach, and they have the ability to do that. Could be that a good salvo of Tomahawk missiles into sensitive targets in Yemen may deter them from continuing with this blockade. At this point, as you know, most international big shipping lines have stopped going through the Red Sea. They are all in a wait and see mode to see how effective is the American intervention. Within brackets, I would say that as an Israeli, I now resent more than before the fact that we have neglected to develop properly our relations with Eritrea, just north of the Straits, and Somaliland, south of the Straits. There were opportunities to do a lot with these countries in recent years. The government or the prime minister has chosen to deal with judicial reform and things like that. Now, before wrapping up, I would like to say something or offer to you my reading of how it happened. How could it happen? The 7th of October. Because we had intelligence, a lot of it, months before. We saw the constant drilling of Hamas. They called it big pillar drills, in which they trained their forces to do exactly what they did on October 7th. I'm telling you, piles of information, misread by 3 peacock generals at the top of Israel's Directorate of Military Intelligence, who know better, who knew better. And they were captives of what we call here the conception that Mr. Sinwar is deterred, that his interest for the time being is to improve the economic situation in the Gaza Strip. So, on the night before the attack, which took place 6:31 in the morning, they had indications, but they didn't even alert the commander of the Air Force. They didn't ask him. They didn't say to him, look, we have some information, we are not sure what it means, maybe get more attack helicopters on alert, more squadrons, instead of the 2 helicopters that they had to fly 40 minutes from the north before they could help in the kibbutzim. That conception that Hamas is deterred led to the fact that what we call the Gaza division, the division which is in charge of defending the 60-odd kilometer border between us and the Gaza Strip, was not at its full force, was not on the ready, and the Nukhba, this elite unit of Hamas, 2,000 of them in the first wave, managed to get within minutes on motorbikes and gliders into the kibbutzim. Those kibbutzim, which had their security squads ready with arms, mostly escaped much of the horror, not entirely. Those kibbutzim, which were, of course, not alerted by the military intelligence, which had the arms, the weapons of their security squads in some storage. And let's find Moshe, maybe he knows where the key is. Those kibbutzim like Be'eri, Kfar Aza, Nahal Oz, Nir Oz. So horrible massacres. The second point, apart from the responsibility of swaggering generals to this fiasco, there was something deeper. And the something deeper is that Israel, the Israeli army, the Israeli security service, not the Mossad, by the way, became totally dependent on technology. They believed in SIGINT, signal intelligence, ELINT, electronic intelligence, dedicated huge effort to develop the cyber capabilities of the intelligence services at the expense of what for an old hand in the business like me is the basic human intelligence and OSINT, open sources intelligence. Two examples, and then I'll hand it over. On human, how can it happen that 2,000 Nukhba fighters are called to the mosques at 3 a.m. in the morning between Friday and Saturday, and not one of them is an agent of ours calling his handler to say something is up, something is brewing? How come none of their wives or parents or neighbors called his handler? Because there was negligence of the basic intelligence source, which is human intelligence. Get agents, buy agents, coerce agents, have eyes on the ground. And I'll give you one example on the failure of OSINT, open source intelligence, which in my view is very often key. 3 months before the October 7th, Hamas television, under control of Mr. Sinwar, ran a drama about an attack, a large-scale offensive of Hamas into Israel, into the kibbutzim, into 3 towns, etc. It was screened on Hamas television. And then they had a ceremony in which Sinwar gave prizes to the producers and said, "You are not far from what we have in mind." But the OSINT intelligence, the OSINT unit, was closed late in 21. I think I'll stop here.
Thanks, Ehud. I should have said to you, I do want to finish on a positive note, but that was very sobering, but very important for everyone here in Australia and around the world to hear. The analysis of what's happening in Gaza was incredible, the region, and we're actually going to have Peter Cooper give a formal vote of thanks at the end, but we'll now go to our Q&A. So grab yourself a glass of water, Ehud, because it just spoke nonstop. It was incredible. I think a lot of our audience are battling with the international media and the poison and the one-sided or a warped version, not even one-sided, a warped version. Can you tell us a bit about the tunnels, the Hamas operating in schools, mosques? Just elaborate a bit more on that so people can actually explain that to other people, and a bit about what your estimate would be on what really are the civilian casualties or the non-combatants, etc., to give people more, better word, ammunition to cope with the lies that we see every day.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I would not venture into an estimate of the real casualties. We cannot rely in any way on what is reported by Palestinian sources or their proxies like UNRWA, etc. But once you have to fight within densely populated area, you call on the population to move out, give them time, open a corridor, humanitarian corridor for them. You still have to do what you have to do, which is destroy Hamas. We cannot tolerate Hamas as a neighbor. We will get at one point to Hezbollah. Not now. Not before spring. You don't fight in Lebanon in winter. But the whole system of Hamas is to fight from within the houses. We had many cases where you go to a children's room in a family house or apartment, and under the bed and inside the mattress, they find the weapons. They found weapons inside teddy bears. The whole strategy, the whole military strategy of Hamas was to fight with a thick cover of civilian population. We had yesterday the director of one of the big hospitals in Gaza, who was captured, an intelligent man. And he was saying to his interrogators, he was saying how Hamas used this hospital. They had rooms there, they had a bunker underneath, they had arms there. So how do you fight? And you know, when the Americans, and you know, everybody here in Israel is raving about the American support and Joe Biden, really excellent. I'm privy to some of the conversations between Blinken and Jake Sullivan and Mr. Abbas, president of the PA. My God, he's getting an earful from them. And by the way, they said to them, also to us, but it's important that they said it to them and to other Arabs, like Saudi Arabia and Egypt. They said, nothing will change before the end of January, and then we will see. Because the idea is, from initially, the Israeli idea was at the end of January to switch to a lower intensity operation. But during the conversations with the American generals who are here, watching and monitoring the developments on the field, when the Americans were asking, can you do it with less casualties, with less destruction of buildings? The Israeli generals said, we have all learned the battles for Raqqa and Mosul. Raqqa in Syria, Mosul in Iraq. If you have a better way, please show us. I don't think we have a precedent in which you fight your enemy and at the same time send tankers with fuel, all provisions from your own territory now. Hamas has really forced us, compelled us to fight inside the cities, something which we have tried to avoid during all other rounds of fighting in Gaza. But there was no way to avoid it now.
Thanks, Ehud. I think that's very, very helpful. You mentioned UNRWA is a proxy of Hamas. Can you explain? I don't think a lot of the audience will understand why you would say that, or why there is that perception.
UNRWA, the United Nations Agency for Refugees, by now they are raising the 5th generation of Palestinian refugees. Never happened anywhere in the world. Instead of rehabilitating them, and the refugee camps are no longer refugee camps. They are built up areas with high-rise buildings, etc. UNRWA is controlled by Hamas. The staff is controlled by the local staff, which is 90+% of those employed by UNRWA are Palestinians from, in this case, from Gaza. And they take their cue from Hamas. And the Director General of UNRWA, Mr. Lazzarini, is speaking a lot about what's happening in Gaza. But where does he stay? Lake Geneva. Sometimes he shows his face in the Middle East, goes to Amman, Jordan, make a press conference or give an interview, and back to Geneva. One thing, when we are talking about the morning after, one key element is yes or no UNRWA, and if yes, then it has to be a very different performance.
Thanks, Ehud. Can you explain if Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood are like-minded organizations, and what do they actually want to achieve? So it's a bit long-winded. And assuming Israel dismantles Hamas's terrorist and the ruling capabilities, including the removal of their leader Sinwar, what is likely to happen to Hamas as an organization and a concept?
Hamas is Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas grew up as the Gaza branch of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. And after the First Intifada, joined the Muslim Brotherhood of the West Bank, which was attached initially to the Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood. Same movement, same agenda, all over. So Hamas is there. Hamas has deep roots in Gaza. I cannot go now into all the, I wrote a book about that, all that since the early 50s. I think that once the military structure of Hamas is destroyed, not every single one killed, of course, Hamas, and they are already talking about it with the PA, Palestinian Authority, Hamas will try to act in the open as a political movement, and all other Palestinian factions accept it, that they will be integrated in the bigger PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. And I have no doubts that Hamas will try to revive as a military underground. But then it's different. It's different when you have to fight a terrorist army with all the equipment that they have, and when you have to cope with an underground, a terrorist underground. So we will act in Gaza in the same way that we act in the West Bank. We know that some Hamas cell is planning a terrorist attack. You don't wait for them. You send the army in. That's happening every night in many places.
Thanks, Ehud. We're used to thinking about Iran and its regional reach in the axis of evil. It seems when it comes to regional influence, Qatar is the new kid on the block. Can you give us a bit more light on where Qatar fits in with Al Jazeera funding Hamas? And is there motivation to support Hamas similar to Iran's?
You know, last time I was in Qatar, and I speak Arabic, and it was dark when I came to the airport, and the driver was a Syrian, and immediately I switched to an Egyptian accent to hide my non-Arabism, and he looked at me and he said, "Welcome to the Philippines." What is Qatar? Qatar is a tiny peninsula, desert, with huge gas fields. The biggest one is shared with Iran. And a royal family that has refused to join the other states of the Gulf. They were supposed to be part of what is today the UAE. They refused back in the 70s. And what they do, because they feel that they are so rich and they're afraid other people will covet the juicy meat of the gazelle, that they are like a player in the casino who goes in and puts his money on every single number, color on the roulette table. So they have relations with Israel for years. First time I was there was maybe 30 years ago, more. They have good relations with Iran. They have managed to withstand a boycott and a siege by Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt combined. Not an easy task, but they managed through Iran. They are paying for the biggest American airbase in the region. They pay the cost. Just be here. We are friends with the Iranians, but we want the Americans here. This is the way they are playing. And they have turned themselves into a media empire through many newspapers and outlets, and of course, Al Jazeera. And they are buying their way around anything. I'm not speaking now about the Mondial, etc. There is a wild exaggeration of the importance of Qatar in the context of the war in Gaza. Yes, they have provided Hamas with a lot of money over the years, as part of their policy of putting their money on everything that you have on the table. And they have a special fondness to anything Muslim Brotherhood. I believe that they are going to be made to downsize their enthusiasm for Hamas in the immediate future. The real player in Gaza, apart from us, is Egypt, which has the only one except us, with border to the Gaza Strip. And Egypt has an interest to see Hamas gone. President Sisi, just now re-elected, only 89% of the vote. Never mind, he is no friend of the Muslim Brotherhood or anybody attached to them.
Thanks, Ehud. Going back to October 7, when you spoke about the generals who were peacocks and the failure, people are asking here why it took hours for the IDF to actually engage on the day? So preparing, you answered, but actually on the day, maybe you can elaborate, why was that so slow?
Because units were not put on the alert. And what you had was individual officers, somebody who was engaged to marry one of my nieces, a major in a commando unit, Maglan. He took his weapons, got a friend on the way, and rushed into a kibbutz, which was badly hit, Kfar Aza, saving people. He was later killed inside the Gaza Strip, unfortunately. But this is what you had. You had, in the beginning, just people rushing in from all over. Many of them, police. Because police is police. So quite a few of the victims of October 7th, apart from the people in the kibbutzim and the 3 towns, Derot, Ofakim, Netivot, were policemen. And it took time for the army to understand the scope and get units rushing to the south. Maybe I need, with your permission, Paul, to add something.
Please.
How far did Sinwar want to go on this attack? Because he could go for a attack of limited scope. You know, get into a few kibbutzim, take hostages, and then go for the big exchange of prisoners, which was always his intention. Why did he go all along the front, simultaneously? Because he felt that under white Toyota Land Cruisers, that I call the modern Camel, they will be able, if taking the Israeli army by surprise as they did, they would be able to link up with the West Bank. Sinwar wanted to get the motorbikes and especially the Land Cruisers, the Toyotas, packed with fighters into Hebron. Imagine how the West Bank would react, liberated by Hamas. That was foiled. The other thing that was foiled was their intention was to stay within Israel and fight from within Israel for 2 or 3 weeks, as much as they can hold. So he saw something unprecedented in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That part was foiled.
Thank God. Ehud, there's a few questions here about the tunnels. Can you talk about just the dimensions, how many tunnels? People talk about different kilometers, and what's the story with the seawater being used to flood, which you touched on, but maybe just a bit more on that, please.
Okay, I'll start with the seawater. It's not as simple as it sounds. It's being done very, very selectively, because you need to be sure that there are no hostages in that particular tunnel. In quite a few places, because of the sandy soil, the water sink into the soil, and there are better ways to deal with the tunnels. Liquid explosives from the air, there are better ways. Altogether, there seems to be about 500 kilometers of tunnels. 2 types of tunnels. Tunnels which allow movement of 1 man at a time, and tunnels which have bunkers and kitchens with ceramics and everything, and underground prisons in tunnels, and tunnels. Those tunnels allow for the Toyotas to drive through. It's different types of tunnels. Now, many of the tunnels connect to neighboring tunnels. They go, it's like a puzzle work. They don't go in straight lines. This is how we think early on in the war, Mr. Sinwar and his brother moved from Gaza to Khan Yunis.
So on that, actually, there's a question here. Is it possible that Sinwar, his brother, and Def have escaped to Egypt? How sure is Israel that they're still actually in Gaza or in Khan Yunis specifically?
Okay. Muhammad Def is a figurehead. He's severely handicapped. You know, they issue statements in his name, sometimes with his voice, but he's not the commander anymore. Long time. So I don't think Sinwar is the kind of man. I know him. I've sat with him 4 times when he was 22 years. During the 22 years, he was in our prisons. Once I did a television interview with him. I don't think he is the kind of guy who is in a hurry to flee. He would try if he reaches the conclusion that everything is lost. He cannot be confident about how the Egyptians would welcome him. There is a lot of bad blood between Sinwar and the Egyptians. Let me just remind you briefly that Hamas has been supporting for years, not lately, but for years, supporting ISIS, Daesh in Sinai, which killed hundreds of Egyptian soldiers.
Thank you. There's a few questions here about the hostages. What's your view on their state? How many would actually be held by Hamas and non-Hamas operatives? And are we, again, confident they're all in Gaza and haven't been smuggled through to Egypt or elsewhere?
I don't know if any were smuggled to Egypt. I know that some of the hostages are not held by Hamas. I told you before, I'm afraid a number of them are not alive anymore. I know that Sinwar is telling the mediators that he's not sure that he can round up even those that are held by his own people. But I believe, like Mark, that this is the highest priority. Get these people out. The war can wait. We can have another pause if we can just get them. It's very interesting that I mean, the Israeli authorities were asking, and still are, for first the women and children. And he is trying to offer the elderly and the sick. Not a good sign. Not a good sign. The last thing he wants to release, that's from my own sources. The last thing he wants to release is the women soldiers.
Yeah, understood. We have so many questions here on the region and politics. I'll do one more on Gaza and then we'll move on to other topics, Ehud, because I do want to finish by 12:30 local time, the latest, 9:30 p.m. In Australia. And just show we could probably have 3 hours of a webinar and not get through all the questions. But one question here is, Did Hamas underestimate the IDF response, the full-scale ground offense, and the commitment to destroy Hamas, etc.? Were they surprised?
Yeah, thank you. I tend to think that Sinwar did not believe that that he's going to bring about a full-blown war. That he tended to think, knowing Bibi, watching him for years, he thought, we will have another round of fighting with some partial ground operation, etc. This is how I'm inclined to see it. I may be wrong.
Sure. As many people know, the past year we've had a lot of challenges with the judicial reform or overhaul, whatever you want to call it. How much did that political division contribute to October 7 and the timing of the attack?
A lot.
A lot.
A lot. Because, and the military intelligence, to their credit, has warned months before October 7 that the enemies, we have quite a few, that the enemies are identifying weakness and division. And they didn't know how to read the fact that the reserve pilot said we are not reporting. And many officers of the top commando unit said we are not reporting as long as Bibi sticks to his guns. And he chose to ignore it. There were 2 strategic alerts issued by military intelligence. Strategic alert in Israel is something, in military language, is something exceptional. They issued 2 strategic alerts to the prime minister that something may be brewing. So one more word on this. You can guess what I think about Bibi. And I used to have many discussions with him on regional issues. No more, no, not me. But I think when people look ahead, they have to realize Bibi will not be in power. So you ask yourself, what is going to replace? I mean, all the polls indicated very clearly, there is no question, you know that poll. I think that there is enough political energy in the protest against the judicial overhaul, and in organizations like Brother in Arms, who took over what the ministries didn't do, providing aid and support and help to the people evacuated from their homes. There is enough political energy stored there to win the next elections. That's my reading. So I wouldn't be rushing to conclusions that it's Gantz or Lapid or somebody else. You will see, I'm convinced of that. We will see a new force coming out of the protest and out of the huge volunteer system that emerged once the war broke out.
You actually answered 2 more questions coming in about the political future for Israel. But I don't know if you do want to comment. What is the future for Netanyahu, do you think? Will he continue in politics?
Well, Bibi will do everything he can. He's doing politics throughout the war. Bibi will try to survive with whatever trick and shtick he can find. My message to him would be that the day after the war, there will be 1 million people coming to his office in Jerusalem or wherever he will be to make sure he's packing and going. I don't think he understands it yet.
Okay. Now jumping from local to more regional, there's a question here about how do you suggest Israel deals with Iran and the nuclear weapon potential, which we haven't really touched on.
Yeah, you know, again, it's a blunt answer, but that's what I think.
Ehud, normally when you speak, you apologize about being blunt in advance.
No, I forgot this time. I think we have to remember there is no other country on the globe that tried for over 30 years to acquire a nuclear bomb and didn't make it. No other country. And one should ask himself, so why the Iranians, which have fantastic physicists and engineers, etc., how come they didn't make it? No breakout. My answer is Iran wants to hang in just below the red line to be able to assemble a bomb, but not to assemble. Just like Japan. That's what they want. So at this point, I think the priority should be one, Hamas, cut one of their proxies. We will get to Lebanon because we cannot have the population of Metula going back with Radwan force on the fence. Lebanon, Yemen, I hope the American-led coalition will take care, will domesticate them. And then we'll see about Iran. But I don't think, as much as it is a priority not to allow Iran to acquire a nuclear bomb, it's very important not to strike too early. It's a major war. This is not a Gaza war. So careful.
Thanks, Ehud. So I do want to try and finish on a positive note. I don't think we've mentioned much about Saudi Arabia and how close were we to having normalization, and do you see there's still potential for that to happen once this dies down?
Absolutely, but I have to say first, Paul, that the whole idea that those deliberations that I was referring to between the Iranians, the Hezbollah, and Hamas were triggered by the ambition to foil the Israeli-Saudi normalization, which was perceived and is perceived by now, also now by the Iranians as a major threat. A major threat.
A threat.
You know,
Why a threat? Why a threat?
They don't want to see the IMEC, the India-Middle East corridor. They are really, really upset about it. And there are many other reasons. They don't want to see Israeli military assets closer to the border. They can already see Israeli assets in the Persian Gulf and around. But Saudi Arabia, I have no doubt the Saudis will resume. I think the terms that they are setting are negotiable. And once you have Saudi Arabia, you will have some other Arab countries coming, less important, more important, Djibouti, Mauritania, people like this, Oman. But more important and closer to Australia, before the war, when the talk was about an Israeli-Saudi normalization, all of a sudden, Malaysia popped out. And the Malaysians, the government of Anwar Ibrahim, the Malaysians started feeling our pulse. How would it work if they will follow Saudi Arabia with some gradual development of relations? Same as Indonesia. Indonesia, I think a lot depends on who gets elected next year as president. And I have my favorite, I will not mention him by name.
Okay.
So a lot of things can happen. And finally, the Saudis, for the first time in many years, and the UAE are willing to support a reformed, or as the Americans say, revitalized Palestinian Authority, which will take over Gaza. They will come with the big money. They have conditions, some to us, but at this point, the conditions are to the PA. I'll give you an example. The Saudis are saying to Mr. Abbas, of course we are coming to assist, but how about you at 87 nominating a deputy? So we have a clear view of the line of succession. What did Abbas do? Typical Palestinian politics. He called all the members of the executive committee of the PLO and said to them, please choose somebody from amongst yourself, which will never happen.
Okay, thank you, Ehud. Again, it's amazing we're already nearly into an hour and a half of the webinar. It's chamber tradition, Ehud, to have someone give a vote of thanks. It's an Australian tradition that we also do here at the chamber. And I'm really excited to ask Peter Cooper from Cooper Investments, who actually came on a mission in May this year to Israel, who runs one of Australia's most innovative, successful investment firms and does amazing work in philanthropy, for Peter to give a vote of thanks to Ehud and Mark as well. So thank you, Peter, for joining.
Thank you, Paul. And Ehud, it was just absolutely fascinating talk you gave. And as Paul said, could have gone on for another couple of hours. Your reputation needs no calling out. 45 years in the region, prime ministers, US presidents, 8 books. And, that was very evident in today's articulation. Your reputation for straight talk, Ehud, needs to be called out. Now, we in Australia like to beat around the bush sometimes, and certainly some of our politicians, as you pointed out, have been less than straightforward. So I really want to thank you for that directness. It's a bit of an Israeli trait, but you have it on steroids. So thank you. Some of the insights, Ehud, that was particularly interesting, and no holding back in describing your own military and generals, using the words peacock and fiasco, were apt terminology for that. But I was particularly interested in the reference to human intelligence, and somewhat pleasing as the world races to more technologically assisted thinking and work. And yeah, like it was a very interesting insight into the way information gets transported around the world, and also in your own military. And sadly, the point you made about the kibbutzes with the information, the early warning signals, I didn't appreciate just how differentiated the outcomes were for those without the relevant information. Just on Australia, I just want you to know, despite the lack of support coming from Australia, from the US request to join that seaborne asset, if you like, in protecting the Red Sea and the lanes that you referred to, and the fact that Australia voted, and you didn't really comment on the ceasefire, but Australia, as you know, voted for the ceasefire. And but I just want you to know, along with everyone in Israel at the IACC and all Israelis, that there are hundreds of thousands of Australians, and I know there are non-Australians on this call, who would agree with me, really stand by you and for you, and for the long term. It's very, very important, as a reminder, and one of the great benefits of talks like this one, Ehud, so I encourage you to do more of them, for us to be reminded that this is a long-term situation, the pain and the commitment that Israelis are bearing is just extraordinary. And, you know, it's very meaningful for us to hear it firsthand from people like yourself. So I really want you to be encouraged by the fact that we are here, we're thinking about you and supporting in the ways that we can. And really want to wish you, you know, the fastest end to this war. And if there's any good things that have come out of it, it's, I guess, the learnings, commitments that you've articulated tonight so well, and some of the lessons that have been learned. I think the just to end, you know, on a upbeat note, I think that, you know, it's a really important point that in addition to the Israeli situation, there's parallel situations around, and I think this conflict has woken us all up, sitting in comfortable Western, you know, USA, Australia, Europe. I think there's been a lot of complacency, certainly in Australia, around some of the political implications of this conflict, and you know, so that wake-up call is, you know, really starting to move people. And as you said, the forces that will come out of this inside of Israel, you know, hopefully are great new things for your country. So thank you. And I think it's past 9:30, so 2 minutes past, so I'll stop there. And yeah, I just want to thank you, Paul, and your team, and Naomi, and everyone. You guys are just incredible. I've done 2 trips to Israel, and it's certainly not the last.
Fantastic, Peter. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for that beautiful vote of thanks, Ehud. Thank you. Thank you to Mark. Thank you to Naomi from my team. All the best, everyone. We'll be in touch early next